Bonjour et bienvenue chez French Sounds. Welcome to French Sounds. In this video, we're going to talk about rhythmic groups. We're going to try to determine where one rhythmic group ends and the next one begins. Now, what is a rhythmic group? It's a group of words that are linked closely together, both syntactically, in other words, by grammar, and semantically by meaning. Let's take, for example, the sentence Je vois une maison bleue. In the sentence, une maison bleue has a specific meaning. It has more of a specific meaning in your mind than just the word maison, which could bring images to mind of any type of house. But if you add the bleu to it, then you're specifying more carefully what type of house, and it's a house that's blue in color. And then you have une, which tells you that you're talking about one of them and not several. So une maison bleue would be considered a noun phrase that is one rhythmic group. It's a noun phrase because maison, being a noun, is the main part of that phrase. Now, if you have je vois, the verb voir is the most important part of that phrase, and the je is simply the subject pronoun that is doing the seeing. So je vois une maison bleue, you have two rhythmic groups. Let's try another sentence. So for example, Pierre est allé au magasin. Pierre est allé au magasin. So au magasin, you have the preposition à joined with the le, which makes au, and then you have magasin. So you have preposition plus object of the preposition. That also is one rhythmic group. Pierre est allé where? And you get the concept. Au magasin, it tells you where. Determining how many rhythmic groups a sentence has in French has a lot to do with how fast you're speaking and in what type of situational context you find yourself. So if you're in a very formal situation, you would be speaking with more rhythmic groups than if you were in an informal situation. The same is true if you're speaking slowly. You will have more rhythmic groups than if you speak faster. What I've tried to do here is organize rhythmic groups into 7 broad categories to make it a little simpler. And we're going to start with the category of subject, pronoun, plus verb, and we'll add to that same category subject pronoun plus object pronoun plus verb. So let's do some examples. Ils sont partis. Ils sont partis. There you have the subject pronoun ils. Sont partis is the verb. It's all one unit. Ils sont partis. Let's do a sentence now with an object pronoun included. Tu m'en as donné. All one unit, all one phrase. Tu m'en as donné. Let's use a negative in a sentence now. Je ne l'ai pas acheté. Je ne l'ai pas acheté. And it works even with inversion. Lui avez-vous parlé? Lui avez-vous parlé? Now, let's go ahead and do the second category, and that's where you have a preposition plus the object of the preposition. And if that object of the preposition is short enough with the preposition, it will be its own rhythmic group. So for example, nous partons avec nos amis. Avec is the preposition, nos amis, object of the preposition. Again, nous partons avec nos amis. Now, what happens if you have a noun phrase as subject of the sentence? Well, if the noun phrase is long enough, it's going to be its own rhythmic group. So, for example, you would have la grande table noire coûte trop cher. So that whole noun phrase, la grande table noire, is one rhythmic group. Let's do it again. La grande table noire coûte trop cher. If, however, your noun phrase is very short, depending on your style level, depending on your rate of speech, that noun phrase could possibly join with the verb. Let's try it first, more slowly. This new sentence. Répétez après moi. Le français se parle ici. So notice you have that little pause. Le français, and I'm holding it a little bit, I'm holding the vowel. That shows the end of the rhythmic group. Le français se parle ici. Notice also my tone drops when I start the second rhythmic group. However, if I'm speaking fast enough and in an informal situation, that can be one rhythmic group. And also I'm going to drop a mutie here. Okay? Répétez. Le français se parle ici. Le français se parle ici. Notice there's no pausing. Something similar happens when you have an adjectival noun phrase, a noun phrase that acts as an adjective to another noun. If that noun phrase is long enough, if the adjectival noun phrase is long enough, it will be its own rhythmic group. For example, c'est la femme aux longs cheveux blonds. Aux longs cheveux blonds is the adjectival noun phrase based on the word cheveux, which modifies femme. Let's do it again. C'est la femme aux longs cheveux blonds. However, if you have a short enough noun phrase that acts as an adjective, it will probably join with that noun that it modifies and make one rhythmic group. So, for example, avez-vous trouvé la bouteille de vin? So, de vin, based on the noun vin, acts as an adjective for bouteille. Avez-vous trouvé la bouteille de vin? Another category is when you have an adverbial phrase modifying a verb. If that adverbial phrase is long enough, it is its own rhythmic group. So, for example, you might have ils attendent très patiemment. So, très patiemment, you have 4 syllables, big enough for its own rhythmic group. Now, if you have a short adverb or adverbial phrase, that will join with the verb to make one rhythmic group. So, for example, j'aime bien ton tailleur rose. Bien, adverb modifying j'aime, is one unit with it. J'aime bien ton tailleur rose. Let's move on now to noun phrases that are direct objects. Again, if it's long enough, you're going to have a separate rhythmic group. For example, nous achetons les bonnes baguettes croustillantes. Les bonnes baguettes croustillantes, 7 syllables. Pretty much as long as you want a rhythmic group to be. You maybe could have 8 in a rhythmic group, but 7 is pretty good. Nous achetons les bonnes baguettes croustillantes. You could even have an infinitive phrase that acts as its own rhythmic group. So for example, elle préfère changer de pantalon. Elle préfère, a little longer, elle préfère changer de pantalon. But when you have a shorter unit, it can join with the verb to make its own rhythmic group. So for example, vous mangez l'abricot. Vous mangez l'abricot. Or you could have an infinitive as the object of the verb. Tu peux t'asseoir. Tu peux t'asseoir. So now we come to our final category for this video. And what we're going to do here is talk about what would be considered parenthetical expressions, groups of words that are added to the main part of the sentence. And in French, they're called détachement or incise, and they can be found either at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of a sentence. So we're going to do an example of each. Each of these parenthetical comments is its own rhythmic group. So for example, ma fille attache tes lacets. Ma fille attache tes lacets. Or you could have something in the middle of a sentence. For example, mon ami, celui de Toulouse, est physicien. Mon ami, celui de Toulouse, here's your incise, est physicien. Or at the end, ils viennent d'arriver, je crois. Ils viennent d'arriver, je crois. So here we've talked about determining rhythmic groups. And rhythmic groups are important in French because they are the main underlying factor for the musicality of the French language. Now I have other videos that talk about intonations and rhythm and stress, and those are also important in the musicality. But this will help you at least understand where you need to make those pauses when you're saying sentences in French. Alors, merci et à la prochaine. Au revoir.